Jordan Sekulow, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Well, let's be optimists here. Let's say that we have a weakened ISIS 6 months down the road, a year, two down the road, whatever time frame that is. What does that mean? What next?
Yeah, well, it's assuming a lot, especially without any troops on the ground, either from our allies or special forces, not necessarily a ground invasion. But assuming that's true, do we get caught up in this situation again where we think, okay, a surge works or these airstrike campaigns have worked, and then we leave a vacuum in a place like Iraq or Syria, and the vacuum quickly fills, especially in the terms of military, quickly fills once again. And we've already been down this road with the Islamic State. They were al-Qaeda in Iraq. They ultimately broke off from main al-Qaeda because they were too brutal for al-Zawahiri. So they were there. We did a surge in 2007 to fight this same group. Then we pulled out of Iraq, and guess what? They came back, and they came back with a vengeance. So it's got to be a long-term strategy, not just focused on the ground, but also looking at where financially they're getting support, the countries that are allowing this support, the UN, which has been somewhat unhelpful in this as well. And, of course, making sure that we're not afraid, ultimately, as you were talking about, to make this, it is a war about ideology. If we don't even understand the ideology behind it, how can we ever really beat it? And terrorism will always be a threat we have to deal with. But this is a specific kind of terrorism. It's jihadist, it's Islamic, and they're recruiting not just from the slums of the world, they're recruiting from the Western world and right here in our own backyard.
And before we go into our own backyard, let me ask you, how do we fight an ideological war like this without painting a broad brush against all, people of all Muslim people
Sure.
of all Muslim faith? How do you distinguish an enemy without a uniform? There's always going to be these splinter groups of al-Qaeda. Sharia law
Sure.
is the common thread which they have. I've been told this is probably a generational war, 25, 30 years. Do you agree with that? And how best do you attack that?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever be done with the war against extremism when it comes to this Islamic extremism. Now, the difference between ISIS and the war that could continue. ISIS has kind of they've got ground forces, over 30,000. They've got a monetary system coming through about at least $1 million. That's a minimum a day coming in through oil, taxes that they run. I mean, they're running social services. There will always be the groups who run to the hills. That's the kind of main al-Qaeda, some of the ones that are hiding out in places like Northern Africa and throughout the world. And they'll come in, they hit, they carry out their attack, and they run back to their cave or their hole. They're not trying to establish the same way, at least, an Islamic State. They have a much longer-term plan for that. What we see here through Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and now he calls himself Caliph Ibrahim, is that we're going to start this Islamic State right here, right now. So long-term, how do we defeat this? We have to send a clear message of how we're going to respond when it happens. We know that that didn't happen in this case. This should not be a 30-year battle against the Islamic State. And certainly, we're going to have to wage wars against the threat to terrorism. We're the greatest country in the world. We're always going to face that kind of threat. But we've got to talk about it. You talked about the idea of painting it with a broad brush. The truth is that for some reason, and I think we can all suspect why, that these groups are able to recruit out of mosques and madrasas in the Western world. It seems to me like there's problems in those mosques and madrasas. And instead of ignoring that or being so PC that we say, well, we're not going to look into that. I mean, how many times do we have to find out about a kid who gets radicalized here, someone who gets radicalized there? The UK has a huge problem with this right now. It's happening in what are so-called mainstream mosques. So what does it take? It takes either Muslims speaking out, getting rid of these people out of their mosque, turning them away, these imams that are preaching hate, and really instilling that into young Muslims at a very early age. And then second, if you're not going to speak out, well, then don't go cry every time people get concerned about what's happening within your faith. So we've got to hear more from louder voices, not just the dissidents within the Islamic world. There's plenty of them, and they've been brave. But if it's not the main religious leaders, people we may not agree with on all the political and geopolitical issues of the day, speaking out, though, the heads of these main mosques, then we're never going to stop that problem of recruitment. And it is ultimately an Islamic problem.